Let's turn then to thinking about Muslims in the United States. When it comes to estimating the number of Muslims in the United States, it is very difficult to get a fairly exact number. And so depending on which stats somebody will use, you might see numbers as low as 2 million to numbers as high as 12 million, with probably 7 to 8 million being a better guess. Some of the information occurs with the lack of data. The U.S. Census does not ask about religious affiliation, so there's not those kind of data. And probably it seems to be the case that most Muslims would feel more comfortable not identifying themselves as Muslim in the current atmosphere. As you see from the stats, though, these are a couple of years old, but roughly 40% of Muslims in the United States hail from India and regions in there that would include Pakistan, so the Indian subcontinent. About 40% of Muslims in the United States are of African American heritage, and then about 20% hail from other places. In fact, while Arab countries are the ones mostly associated with Islam, most of the Arabs who live in the United States are from the Christian populations of those places coming to flee persecution. How have Muslims come to the United States? Well, like everybody else, here including those of European descent, through immigration. And that comes through a variety of ways. Some of that immigration we might call unwilling immigration. Now, as this map shows, Islam, of course, is spread by the 17th century throughout most of Africa, with some control later on in the southern parts. And so by the time of the slave trade, there were quite a few Muslims in Africa. It's estimated that between 15 and 20% of those Muslims, 15 to 20% of slaves that came were Muslims. With that, there's a couple things that suggest that is the case. In some places, we have indication in slave registers of people with Islamic names. Ali, Muhammad, other types of Islamic names in the slave registers. There are examples of, well, after slavery, late 19th, early 20th century, the United States government attempted to interview and record the situation under slavery, so they did a lot of interviews. And in some of those interviews, people talked about seeing individuals involved in Islamic practice. Right? They would pray several times a day. People that had wrote copies of the Quran or a sheet or two of the Quran. Other things sounded like Islam, but it was always in the state of somebody saying, but it was someone else, it wasn't me. Right? And so there are those indications of the presence of Muslims among the slaves. The other thing as well is that many Muslim slaves were kind of given preferential treatment. Many of the slaves were literate in Arabic, and this kind of made them appear to slave masters as they were of a higher order of slaves. They were thought to be part Arab. They weren't pure African, and this is the assumption. And so they were given other responsibilities, becoming overseers or something like that, taskmasters. Now, it's unclear how well Islam maintained itself through slavery. There was such an effort by slave masters to get rid of any sort of non-Christian religious practice, whether that was traditional religions or Islam. There are other indications in the historical record of other places where Muslims might have been on North America or South America. Some scholars suggest there were Muslims on Columbus's crew, which is certainly possible. There were Muslims in Spain at the time. People will point to artifacts and inscriptions, but it's not completely, accepted among the scholarly population, so it's largely hypothetical. There are other cases of immigration to the Caribbean due to some of the things that went on in Spain. So slavery, perhaps some Muslims prior to vast European exploration, but most Muslims came in a variety of ways, especially those who are not of African or then later African American descent, coming for a variety of reasons. In the late 19th century, many of the people, as you can see, there are single male Muslims being predominantly the people that arrived. A lot of these people come because they are in regions under the control of the Ottomans, and so they don't want to fight in the Turkish army, and so they'll come to the United States. Or they're looking to make their wealth in the United States and then go back to their countries. A lot of those early immigrants had various stages of difficulty with not knowing English, being Muslims in a non-Muslim land. Others would join them, and so the relatives of Muslims that came for those reasons, and kind of at the end of World War I, people that wanted to flee the control of the British or the French. And so you have people coming from all over at different places. Through the early 20th century, there's a lot of limitations on immigration, and so there's not many Muslims coming to that point. From the 1960s on, a lot of people began to immigrate. A lot of the immigration from Europe declined, and an increase from the Middle East and from Asia. Half of the immigration was Muslim. A lot of people coming because of political turmoil, others coming for education or to participate in technology. Settling like places in the Midwest, in the case of these early immigrants. In more modern times, New York, Chicago, California, right, all sorts of places where they are centered. A lot of Muslims, as they come, of course, face a lot of similar pressures that other immigrants do, facing stereotypes, racism in some cases. Some Arabs were grouped with African Americans throughout the Jim Crow South and were not allowed in the so-called white-only establishments. The second generation, especially, of many of these places often tried to give up speaking Arabic, adopt American names, so Muhammad became Mike, Yaqub became Jack, and so this is to kind of distance yourselves as you're kind of assimilating. As we've kind of mentioned, there was an African American presence in Islam from a very early time, and that has changed and modified over the times as well. And there have been a variety of African Americanized practices that aren't technically what we might call global Islam, but are kind of connected. One example would be the Nation of Islam. Again, not global Islam. The nation is often, some aspect of it is kind of distanced by other Muslims. Right? They feel that it's too racialized. They feel that it's not following a lot of what they believe. The Nation of Islam was founded by a man named W.D. Fard. He was a peddler who went about the Midwest, especially selling these supposedly exotic goods that he had gotten from the East, and teaching about Islam. He claimed that African Americans were descendants of an ancient tribe called Shabazz, a tribe that had been lost but was now being found. Many of the people that knew Fard commented that his skin appeared white, and his racial origins are actually one of the mysteries surrounding him. He claimed to be of Middle Eastern origin or mixed race, but regardless, in the 1930s, he disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him. He'd been accused of murder, was in prison for a while in Detroit, got out, got into other criminal situations, and was forced to leave Detroit. There was some communication between Fard and his followers, but then he just kind of disappears. Nobody knows anything about what happened to him. Leadership transferred from Fard then to one of his followers, a man named Elijah Poole, who took the name Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Poole was the son of a poor Baptist preacher who became a minister in Fard's movement and eventually assumed leadership. Supposedly he ran the nation like a dictatorship, established a hierarchy. And when individuals were accepted for membership, they would drop their last name, their so-called slave name, and adopt an X as their last name to signify their unknown African heritage. And eventually they would receive a new last name from Muhammad when he decided it was time. Other Muslims, of course, as I mentioned, have been kind of anguished because there's been such an emphasis on race in the nation, where global Islam has emphasized all Muslims are together in one community, race doesn't matter, status doesn't matter, you are a Muslim. But then there's other teachings of, especially as Elijah Muhammad developed them, which claimed that a mad scientist named Yaqub had specifically bred white people in order to get back at Allah. And Allah is the exclusive name for God among the nation. And so Allah creates white people to enslave members of the Shabazz tribe. So white people are soulless and evil in this origin myth. And so the nation was meant to kind of overcome a lot of that. And many of the members of the nation actually pushed for a separate nation for blacks, believing that whites and blacks could never coexist peacefully. And so that racialized component, of course, foreign to the Quran, foreign to global Islam. There are some other similarities, though. The nation will pray 5 times daily, avoid pork, avoid alcohol.